Thank you, Joseph. How's everyone doing? Good. Who is jet lagged? I see you. I see you. If at any point during this presentation anyone wants to stand up, go get a refill in coffee, I completely understand. No judgment here. So, a quick introduction. Hey everyone, so nice to meet you all. I am V. I am with the Ethereum Foundation's privacy and scaling team. What we do in this team is we have multiple projects that focus on privacy technologies. So things like zero knowledge proof and just building on it. The project that I specifically work on as a marketer is on quadratic funding. That's a big sounding name. I promise you that it's not as scary as it sounds. And the talk is going to jump into and delve a bit deeper on what is community funding, what have traditional models of funding been like, as well as what quadratic funding is. So that's a quick intro on me. Quick look at the agenda. So we quickly touch on what are public goods. Has anyone here heard about the term public goods before? Nice, I see you. I feel like James is kind of cheating because he knows everything about PSE. So we'll look quickly at what are public goods, and then we'll look at this big scary sounding word called quadratic funding. We look at how it works. We walk through some examples. We talk about why anyone would consider quadratic funding versus traditional models of funding. We look at what's in it for any of us here. Why should any of us even consider quadratic funding? And very lastly, we look at how can anyone participate. So going into it, what are public goods? Anyone here, those that raise their hands, public goods, anyone knows or can shout out what are some characteristics of public goods? Any examples? Go right ahead.
So things which generate economic value that cannot be captured by company, therefore company side.
That's exactly it. So top level characteristics and then examples of what the gentleman mentioned. We'll look at it. So public goods. Firstly, you cannot exclude anyone. So for example, if a public good like a park, you can't exclude anyone from using it. It is non-rivalrous, meaning, again, going back into the example of a park, just because one individual is using it doesn't mean there's less of it for anyone else. And lastly, availability. Again, looking at an example of a park, just because 10 people are strolling through a park doesn't mean there's less of the park for the 11th person to use. So these are some characteristics of public goods. And looking at some real-world examples of public goods, you have things like your street lights, roads, libraries, parks. In the online world, some examples of it, of course, the Ethereum blockchain, as well as a Web 2 example would be YouTube, where anyone with an internet access can use YouTube. These are examples of public goods. And then we look at funding, quadratic funding. Before we jump into quadratic funding, let's take a step back and look at how funding has traditionally been done for these public goods. So if you look at the current model that exists right now, governments are the ones deciding how and where funds should be utilized every year. And when does the community get involved? It is during the early stages when you are voting for your favorite political party. So a really quick example, let's say if I am really invested in climate change solutions, when can I give voice to what I'm invested in? It is when I am voting for which political party would best reflect my interests. And the hope is down the line, in the next 4 to 6 years that they are in power, they would allocate more budget and more funds towards these public goods. So in that sense, our choice is at best reflected maybe once every 4 to 6 years. That's how public goods have been funded so far. Now, if we look at this concept of quadratic funding, it sort of switches that model where the first step is you have a matching amount of money. So this could be from anyone. It could be from your governments, it could be from a nonprofit organization, it could be from a corporation that decides to fund a public good in a community. They put up a sum of money. This could be any sum of money. And what happens is that we call this the matching pool. What happens is the community then gets to decide where and how they would like for public goods in their community to be funded. They get to cast a vote in order to show what is important to them. The entire idea of this is to push power towards the community and to better reflect what is important to them at this point in time. So again, if you look at general elections, what happens in many countries is that a lot of whales have power because they are able to fund a lot of political campaigns. And so as a result, what happens is their choices are then reflected into laws that are passed. Whereas if you look at quadratic funding, at any and every stage, your choice and the community's choice of what should be funded is reflected very quickly. So how does this look like? Every single person has a predetermined amount of voting. Traditionally, you have a 1-to-1 voting where every individual has maybe one vote and can only vote for one party. Whereas with quadratic funding, you have, for example, 10 votes and you can vote for multiple projects. So meaning I could vote for maybe my local park to be refurbished and the library to be refurbished. So my votes go across multiple projects. It evens the distribution of voting powers, and it is an extremely decentralized process. The entire idea is that you're giving power back to the community. And so for my Lord of the Rings fans, of course, with quadratic funding, you do have power. How does it work? So that's a lot of abstract concept that we've been talking about. This is the quadratic funding formula. And that is me trying to understand or explain the quadratic funding formula to anyone. It is a little complex, but I think the best way to explain it is to walk us all through an example. So let's assume that we have $10,000 put up by an organization to be distributed to 3 projects that are planning on funding public goods. And because this is an extremely serious presentation, we're going to use minions as an example. So again, assume 3 projects have $10,000 to be distributed amongst them. The community then gets to vote which projects they would like to be funded. Project A receives $1,000 from 2 contributors. Project B, which is slightly more popular, receives votes and money from 5 contributors. And lastly, Project C, which is the popular kid on the block, ends up receiving $1,000 from 20 contributors. The key call out here is that all 3 projects are receiving the same amount of money. In terms of voting from the community, the only difference is down to how many people are voting for each project. So the final distribution of the $10,000 goes through this math formula, and how the fund is then distributed is for the first project, which had 2 voters, they end up getting about $750 out of the $10,000 pool. For the second project with 5 contributors, you end up receiving about $1,900. And for the very last project, which was the most popular project, you see they end up receiving the most amount of money from the matching pool of $10,000. So the entire idea of QF is that it is a very strong signal, not just to the community on what is important right now, but also to bodies in power, that, okay, this is what the community values right now at this moment. The entire idea is that the wider the support for for this specific project, the more votes they get, and as a result, they then get more amount of money. So that brings us down to the question of why quadratic funding. 4 main reasons. The first one is around donations. The more the number of votes a project gets, the more matching pool amount they get, the more funding they get. Ultimately, it's about how many people value your project, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you have one whale that gives all their votes towards you. It's more important that you have community support. Next, signaling. Again, it is an excellent form of signal to people in power, to governments, that, okay, for example, if, again, a climate change project ends up getting the most number of votes, then it acts as a signal to your local government that this is what the community values at this point in time. Third, powered by the community. We are all about the community here, and this is the best form of signal to show what matters to you, to your community at this stage in time. And very lastly, but most importantly, every cent counts, because the end stage of quadratic funding is that the more number of votes you vote, that's all that matters. It's that you are voting. It doesn't matter how much of money you put up for the vote. Even if it's $1, all that matters is that you participate. So why participate? Like, what's in it for you, for me, for anyone here? I guess the reality is that we have all, in one way or another, benefited from public goods. We've all been in a park, we've all been in a library. All of us here would, in one way or another, have built on the Ethereum blockchain. So by taking part, you then become an active participant in signaling to bodies in power, to your local governments, on what is important for your community. Most importantly, you also are choosing to fund the projects that are working in your community so that they can continue working on it. They continue to get money in order to do the good work that they're doing. So ultimately, the idea is that the power is in your hands. So a quick example, we've run quite a few quadratic funding rounds already. I think the most relevant one here is that there was a round run during DCxPrague last year. It was for the amount of $20,000, and it was distributed amongst 17 projects. So down to the most important question, how can you participate? This, if you scan this would bring you to the quadratic funding website. There are 2 ways that you can participate. If you are a community leader, the application form is on this site. Feel free to scan, check out the website. It gives you a rundown of like what is quadratic funding, how does it work. You can apply to participate in order to run rounds within your community. Feel free to also come talk to me. I'd love to get connected. If you also know of any future communities, or if you know of any community leaders as well, feel free to refer them to us. We would love to get connected to work together. So last but not least, remember our favorite guy, Vitalik, is always watching, always looking to scale. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you all. Questions?
A second one. Do you have a second mic? No, they don't. Okay, so the question is, I love quantitative funding and quantitative voting. We use it a lot. It's absolutely awesome, even in the projects, to ideally align the contribution rewards, I would say. It's really, really perfect. One thing which I realize on some of the hackathons, yes, is when you like distribute this power towards the people who are there voting, is there any like research progress in the quantitative funding and voting to better improve that, like to avoid the popularity contests?
That's a really good point. So some contexts, some of the projects that have participated in, for example, hackathons, and this is across multiple regions, they have given feedback that, sometimes it doesn't matter, it comes down to how good the project's marketing is versus how good the service they are delivering is.
The value.
Exactly, the value. So that's definitely like a really, really big challenge for any community leaders or any organizers. It's a real challenge. The truth is we don't have an answer to this yet. All that the community leaders so far have enforced is to repeat the value of quadratic funding. And so they try to do this through education of reminding event participants, their communities of why public goods are important, and then trying to keep them grounded to the fact that, hey, don't forget the main reason why you're voting for these projects is to reflect what value it is. So that's on the participant side. For the project side, what we've seen a lot of event organizers do is when it comes to KYC for project applications, they help. One of the key requirements is to remind projects that you're not allowed to shill, you're not allowed to say that you're going to airdrop. So having these requirements ensure that only projects that are non-profit in the sense are allowed to apply. So those are the two ways right now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I see that it's like potentially like other research that needs to be done there in order to effectively show the value of the at the time when the contest or
Exactly.
Selection is being done. How to actually get or provide the insight and get the exposure to the value of such a public good. And that might be a very different question. It could be research aside, but we have a tool like this to, based on what is being shown, that we could use the quadratic voting for funding.
Exactly. And that's a very good point to raise, because the reality is that when you see a lot of communities that do run it, so far everyone we've seen are volunteer-led. And if you understand, it's like running a startup where every person has to do 10 different roles and in a span of 2 weeks. So they are stretched for time, they're stretched for resources. And so to balance multiple things at a go, it's definitely a challenge. But we appreciate it so much that all they do is they keep trying to remind people and educate. But yes, that's definitely a very real concern.
Hi. Okay, good.
So I'm Vinay Gupta. I used to be at the Ethereum Foundation. I did the talk on public goods for DevCon 1. So what I wanted to ask about this was, why is it quadratic? Like, it could be a logarithmic, it could be the third or the fourth or the fifth power. Is there any particular reason it's a square rather than a cube or a fourth power?
I do not have an answer for that, unfortunately, but I will love to get connected with you later, and then we can dive deeper into the math.
Yeah, sure. Good, sounds good. I'm around all week.
Hi.
Hello.
So I know when Gitcoin were doing a bunch of these rounds, they had this whole process for trying to prevent Sybil attacks and doing auditing to make sure that accounts represented different people. Otherwise, you can just do vote stuffing, right? And mess around with the mechanism. So I'm wondering what types of solutions other than Gitcoin's approach have you seen to this? So if a project wanted to use quadratic funding, if there's something that they could tap into.
Right. So if everyone got that question, the question was around, correct me if I'm wrong, but how do we prevent one project from getting most of the votes? Like, is there a way to prevent anti-bribery? Is that a correct understanding?
So it's not just bribery. One person, they can pretend to be many people.
Right, yeah, Sybil resistance.
Yeah, one project, they can vote for themselves by creating a bunch of sock puppets. And if there's money at stake and you're incentivizing them to do that, then you need some, counteracting security mechanism of some kind to balance that out.
So quadratic funding is the top layer of it. How the voting is powered, it's called, we use this solution called MACI, Minimum Anti-Collusion Infrastructure. So how this works is behind all of the math, but basically that is your verification where by using MACI technologies, you help identify that, okay, one person connected to one wallet is voting, except that by using MACI, all you can verify is that I have voted, but it cannot show, which projects I've voted for. So that's a two-pronged approach in that by using MACI, each person's votes is tied to one wallet. So that prevents that Sybil resistance. And by showing that, okay, I can only reflect to anyone else that I have voted, but I cannot show you that, okay, I have voted for your project specifically. That also helps tie into ensuring that bribery is not possible. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think I understand the part about bribery, because if you can't prove that you voted in a certain way,
Exactly.
then someone can pay you for doing that, but you can't show them that you did your part of the bargain, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but the part about sort of like proving that different people are attached to different wallets, I didn't understand yet how MACI does that, or if it tries.
So I don't have screen grabs of the voting process right now, but to walk you through how it's like the voting process happens is, say for example, out of 10 projects, I pick 3 projects to cast my vote. I would ultimately need to connect my wallet to it, and before I cast my vote, there would be a minimal gas fee involved. Again, when I'm signing off on all of these votes, it is my wallet tied to these votes. So through that manner of like signing off on these votes, that's how Sybil resistance is built in, because only one wallet per person can end up voting. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Well, I guess the attack vector I'm thinking about, and maybe.
It sounds like the question is, how does MACI work?
Well, I mean, you could say that at some level it's like even more abstract. How do you know that the person, there is a person behind the wallet, and it's not the same person behind 1,000 other wallets. That's, you know.
Yeah, I'm also the PSC. I'm not sure if Macy uses this, but there are some other things around, I think it's called semaphore. Yeah. So I'm not sure if Macy uses semaphore under the hood, but you can explain semaphore. Or
Macy does not use
okay.
semaphore, but
Which is, yeah, that's something that allows you to basically generate a proof based on social logins. So one of the examples I heard was if you've got a Twitter account that's considered authentic to some degree, whatever Twitter's scale was, it can generate a proof to say that you have this authenticity. So it's very hard to create a lot of those bots to that level of humanness. And then that was baked in as a proof. And then, yeah, that could be an integration down the line. Or yeah.
I mean, the first part, you're saying you can piggyback on, like, other people have to solve this problem, like Twitter. Yeah. Very cool. Thanks.
yeah. Thanks, James.